Welcome to the Thriving Scapegoat, a podcast for women who are cast as the problem, when in truth, they were the truth tellers. I'm your host, Cielo, somatic coach, author, and guide for women healing from complex trauma, family enmeshment, and the invisible wounds of being scapegoated. If you ever felt misunderstood, exiled, or blamed for dynamics you didn't create, if you've done the deep work to break the generational patterns and you're ready to reclaim your voice, your body, and your life, you're in the right place. This is where we stop over-explaining, stop performing for love, and start living in alignment with what's real. Here, we talk about nervous system healing, shadow work, emotional sovereignty, and what it takes to not just survive your past, but thrive beyond it. Because you were never too much. You were never the problem. You were the disruption to the dysfunction, and now you get to become the woman who rises because of it. Let's begin. You can know leaving was necessary and still grieve the family that you wish that you had. Nobody tells you that you can be completely certain that you needed to leave and still spend years grieving the people that you had to leave behind. And that's one of the strangest things about estrangement. You can stop answering the phone, you can block the number, you can finally have peace in your home. You can wake up one morning and realize, oh my God, nobody is yelling at me, nobody is bullying me, nobody is criticizing me, nobody's triangulating, nobody's demanding something from me. I can actually breathe. And still, grief can show up at 3 a.m. It can show up on your birthday, at Christmas, at Thanksgiving, when you see a mother and daughter laughing together in a grocery store, when someone says, my mom called me yesterday, when something wonderful happens and your first instinct is, I wish I could call my family. And then you remember, you can't. Or you don't want to. Or you know that making that call would cost you something more than you're willing to pay. And that can be incredibly complicated because sometimes you aren't grieving the relationship that you actually had. You're grieving the relationship that you needed, the relationship that kept you hoping that would eventually exist. And today, that's what I'm talking about. The grief that nobody talks about after estrangement. Welcome back to the Thriving Scapegoat. I'm Cielo, your host. And if you found this podcast because you're estranged from your family or you're considering it, or maybe you're the black sheep, the scapegoat, the difficult one, the overly sensitive one, or maybe you're simply beginning to realize that the way that you learned to survive your family has followed you into your life, you're in the right place. This podcast exists to give language to experiences that were once incredibly difficult for me to explain. And today I'm talking about one of them. Because there's a particular type of grief that comes along with estrangement that doesn't get acknowledged. And I think it's because people want estrangement to be black and white, to be simple. They want you to either be right or wrong. You're either the victim or the villain. You're either relieved or devastated. But humans don't work that way. You can be relieved and still be devastated. You can be angry and still love someone. You can know a relationship is unhealthy and toxic and still miss it. And you can know that leaving was necessary and still wish that you hadn't had to leave. Both can be true. One of the things that I've learned in my own estrangement of a decade is that grief isn't always about missing the actual relationships. Sometimes I'm grieving the relationship I spent decades hoping would become possible. And that's a different flavor of grief because when you're the scapegoat, you can spend an enormous amount of your life trying to solve the relationship. You think, maybe if I explain it differently, maybe if I become less emotional, maybe if I go do a 400th silent retreat, maybe if I become more loving, compassionate, maybe if I have better boundaries, maybe if I apologize. But what if I wait? Maybe they'll finally see me. And underneath all that young hope is maybe one day that they'll finally love me in the way that I needed to be loved. And that's a painful hope to release. Because when you finally stop trying to get someone who you needed them to be, you don't just lose the person, you lose the possibility. And sometimes the possibility is what you've been living on, the potential. There can be a moment in estrangement when something becomes painfully clear. And maybe there was a particular conversation, a holiday, a birthday, a betrayal, a boundary you finally set, a moment when you realized I'm still trying to convince these people that my experience is real. And something in you finally says, I'm done. And for me, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to decide. Not because I don't deserve it, not because I didn't try, but because sometimes another person's capacity is out of my control, and that's one of the hardest lessons in adulthood. You cannot love somebody into consciousness. You cannot explain somebody into empathy. You can't perform your way to being understood, and you cannot create mutuality by yourself. These relationships require two people. And sometimes the most loving thing that you can do for yourself is to stop trying to make a relationship out of something that continues to harm you. And that doesn't mean you don't have to grieve it. There's 6 griefs of estrangement. And I've been thinking about how many different things that we could actually be grieving when we're estranged. And I want to name them because sometimes simply having language for something changes our relationship to it. First, you can grieve the actual relationship, even if it was dysfunctional, even if it was painful, even if there was abuse, even if you haven't spoken in years. There are still moments, memories, love. Grief doesn't require that a relationship be healthy. You can grieve the relationship that you wish that you had, the mother that you wish would have protected you, the father that would have been there, the sibling that could have understood, but the family that gathered around you, making you earn your place. This grief can be enormous because you're not mourning something that existed. You're mourning something that should have existed. Third, you can grieve the childhood you didn't receive. And this one can show up much later in life because maybe you were too busy surviving your childhood to grieve it. Maybe you became the achiever, the caretaker, the peacemaker. Maybe you became the invisible child or the difficult child or the responsible one. In any event, you adapted. You became incredibly capable. And then somewhere in midlife, maybe you finally took up enough space to realize, wait a minute, I didn't get to be a child. And that realization can be heavy. Number 4, you can grieve the family identity that you lost, even if that identity was painful. Because being someone's daughter, sister, aunt, cousin, whatever your role was, is a part of how we understand ourselves. And estrangement can make you ask, well, who am I now? And that can be terrifying. Because when you step outside the family system, you might discover that you've spent years organizing your identity around your role inside of it. The 5th grief is grief of the future that you imagine. And this one doesn't get talked about enough. The imagined birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, growing old together. Maybe someday having your parents at your wedding or your book signing or becoming an aunt or caring for aging parents or whatever it is, sitting around a table whenever everyone's old. Maybe reconciliation. Maybe simply being known. And sometimes estrangement means grieving an entire future that will never happen in the way that you imagine. 6th, you can grieve being witnessed by people who already knew your history. And this one has been huge for me because when you build a new life, there can be moments when you desperately want someone who knew the old you to see who you've become, see the work, the growth, the risks that you've taken, the things that you've created, the woman that you have become despite it all. And there can be an ache. I wish someone could see me now. And sometimes they can't, or they refuse to. They aren't capable of seeing you without seeing the old role that was assigned to you, and that hurts. So I want you to do something for me right now. If you're driving, don't do this obviously, but just listen. What if you were somewhere you can safely pause and take a minute? And this is something I teach in seasonal somatics. I don't want you to just intellectually understand this. I want you to notice what happens in your body. So just place a hand over the heart, on the stomach, and you don't need to change your breath. Just notice where your hands are at. Feel the warmth of your hands. Feel the contact. And if it feels comfortable, look around your environment. Notice one thing that you see, one thing that you can hear, one thing that's supporting your body. And very gently say to yourself, leaving was necessary. And notice. Don't force anything. And I am grieving. Notice. Leaving was necessary, and I am grieving. You don't have to decide which one is more true, and you don't have to resolve any contradiction. You don't have to convince yourself that you're okay. Just notice how both truths can exist in the same body. And maybe there's a little bit more breath. Maybe there's tightness. Maybe there's anger or sadness. Maybe there's nothing. All of it is information. And that's what I want you to practice. Don't rush to change the sensation. Just notice. Sometimes healing begins when we stop arguing with what's already true. So I want to talk about something that can create shame after estrangement. Relief. Because sometimes you're grieving and you're also fucking relieved. You're relieved that no one's calling, asking for money. No one's criticizing you. No one's expecting you to walk into the room and immediately scan everyone's face. You can be relieved that you don't have to make decisions about defending them. Relieved that your nervous system isn't constantly preparing for the next interaction. And then you feel guilty for feeling relieved. If you do that, relief does not mean that you didn't love them. Relief doesn't mean that you're cold. Relief doesn't mean that you don't care. Relief can simply mean that your body recognizes the absence of threat, and that matters. Your body may know something before your mind can articulate it. And this is one of the biggest reasons I became so interested in somatic work, because I spent a lot of my life trying to understand. Understanding helped me. Of course it did, because insight does matter and language does matter. Therapy matters. But there came a point where I realized I couldn't understand myself and still react from the same survival patterns. I could know why I was hyper-independent. I could know why I didn't trust people or understand. I could understand people-pleasing and identify self-abandonment, and still my body would brace, my nervous system would anticipate. I still find myself over-functioning and trying to handle everything myself and struggling to receive at times. And that's why I created Seasonal Somatics, because I became interested in the question, what happens when we stop trying to think our way out of survival and begin creating new experience of safety, choice, and connection in the body? And that's a different type of healing. This is where I want you to take care if you are listening from a place of deep pain, okay? Your estrangement is part of your story. It doesn't have to become the entire story. You don't have to spend the rest of your life proving that you were right. You don't have to spend the rest of your life waiting for an apology. You're not going to get it. You don't have to spend the rest of your life explaining what happened. You don't have to spend the rest of your life being the black sheep. And at some point, the question changes. It becomes, what kind of life do I want to build now? And who am I when I'm not reacting? What do I love? What makes me feel alive? And who makes me feel safe? What does friendship mean to me? What does community mean to me? What kind of love do I want? What traditions do I want to create? And what does family mean when I get to define it? And maybe most importantly, where do I belong now? So we're currently in the late summer of the 5-season spiral. And late summer is about harvesting. And I love this season because it isn't asking us to become something new. It's asking us to notice what we've already grown, what's ripened, what's nourishing to us, what's actually here. And if you've experienced estrangement, or perhaps one of the things being invited into this truth is that what you can and can't change, the truth about what your body is telling you, about what relationships nourish you and deplete you, and the truth of what you're no longer willing to tolerate, and perhaps the truth that you can build a life even when the people that you expected to share it with are not a part of it. That doesn't erase the grief. It doesn't have to. So I want you to know that if you're listening and you're right in the middle of estrangement, I want to tell you something. You don't have to make every decision today. You don't have to figure it all out for the rest of your life. You don't have to know if estrangement will last forever or not. You can focus on today and what your body needs, what boundary needs to be set, what support is available, and what would make today 5% safer. If you're considering estrangement, please don't let a podcast episode make that decision for you. Get support. Talk with someone qualified that can help you with your particular circumstances, because estrangement is deeply personal. This isn't one prescription. This is only the ongoing practice of becoming more honest with yourself. So I want to leave you with this. You can miss someone and still know you cannot be safe in a relationship with them. You can love someone and still choose distance. You can grieve and still be free. You can be relieved and still have a broken heart. You can lose an entire family and build a life where you finally belong. Both can be true. And maybe that's what healing actually looks like sometimes. Not getting to the point where you don't care anymore, but getting to the point where caring no longer requires you to abandon yourself. If this episode found you in a tender place, I hope that you'll take a little time after we finish and don't immediately scroll. Don't immediately consume something else, but put your feet on the floor and look around the room and feel the surface underneath of you and take a breath and ask yourself, what am I grieving? What is already here that I can receive? Because grief and receiving can exist together too. And that's part of the intelligence of late summer. So I want to continue exploring this work with you. So if you're not already receiving my newsletter, I want you to experience seasonal somatics rather than simply hear me talk about it. You can find an upcoming seasonal practice and immersion at juliecielo.com. But seasonal somatics was created for this very reason, because sometimes we don't need another explanation. We need a new experience in our body, a new choice, a moment where the body discovers there's another way. So I want to thank you for being here and thank you for trusting me with your story. And if you're walking through estrangement right now, I want you to know you're not broken because you're grieving. You are human and you are allowed to build a life beyond the role that your family gave you. I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If today's episode resonated, that's your entry point. Healing scapegoating isn't just insight, it's nervous system work. And this is what I teach through seasonal somatics, a body-based method that helps you regulate, reconnect, and move with real change. I offer weekly group classes, both in person and online, immersive retreats, and limited one-on-one mentorship. You can find all the details in the show notes. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs it, and make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, choose truth over belonging, self-trust over self-abandonment. You didn't just survive this to stay stuck. You're here to thrive.